Greetings! Welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel. This video is the introductory video for a long sequence that I've been working really hard on for quite a few months on making what's called a Mocotaugan. That is this item right here. This is my prototype. We'll talk about this in a bit. The Mocotaugan is an Algonquinian word. It basically means crooked knife because, as you can see, this knife is not straight in any dimension, right? In any direction, okay? This is an Eastern North American indigenous blade form, okay? And in my opinion, it is one of the most amazingly ergonomic, useful woodworking tools that anybody on Earth has developed. It is used very differently from a European knife. A European knife you usually grab like this, right? But if you think about this grabbing it like this, what? No, useless, right? Blade sticking straight up in the air. How would you use this? Well, this is, you gotta turn your hand over and you hold it palm up. And when you hold it palm up like this, you'll see the fingers wrap around, the thumb has a nice thumb rest, and if I just hold my hand in the neutral plane like this, the blade is perpendicular to my body. So it functions as a one-handed draw knife, cutting a little piece of bark there. Okay? And it is just an amazing tool. It is really kind of the ultimate survival knife, right? Or survival knife, bushcraft knife, for any of this sort of thing. It's very safe. Yes, I'm pulling toward myself, but because of the curve in the tip of the blade, I cannot really stab myself. And if you just hit straight in, you can apply quite a bit of force, even on a sharp tool, and it's not going to penetrate the skin. You need to slice in order to really penetrate the skin. So it's a very safe tool, which is important if you think about a world where there's little medical care and even small cuts can lead to gangrenous wounds. Safety is quite important. Get rid of that, you get the idea. So it's really an amazing bushcraft survival knife. This is the tool that really built the birch bark canoe. Okay? This scooped out charcoal from dugout canoes. This makes canoe paddles. This builds huts. This is the do-everything construction tool of Eastern North America, okay, in the early contact period. Now, I want to talk, before I talk about the construction of this is my prototype, and the one that I'm going to be making in this video series is modified from the prototype. I haven't had the privilege of holding an original, so I'm learning this from mostly, from pictures and study and reading, historical documents, things like that. But I want to talk about where this came from. And when you hear a high school level history discussion of metal in North America, you'll quickly get the impression that metal came with Europeans. And that is just absolute BS. Okay? Metalworking in North America starts about 10,000 years ago. And it starts with a cultural complex called the Old Copper Culture or the Great Lakes Copper Culture. Oftentimes this is most heavily discussed in context of the Mississippian Empire, which is a little bit later than that, quite a bit later than that. But it is believed that copper work in North America goes back 10,000 years. This means that North American indigenous peoples are the oldest metallurgical culture on Earth. Okay? Copper works in Eurasia starts with the Chalcolithic, which begins about 7,000 years ago in the Balkans and then spreads quickly to Asia Minor, really flourishes in Asia Minor, and then blows out from there in its fully mature form. Okay? So the Balkan peoples are the oldest metallurgical culture in Eurasia, but they're beat by a couple thousand years by North America. Now, the reason there's a difficulty in dating this because of nincompoops with metal detectors. Person with metal detector goes out, metal detector goes ding, ding, ding. They take a little trowel, dig an artifact out of the ground, and then move on. They never know there was an archaeological site. And then sometime later, an archaeologist comes and digs that archaeological site, and there's no copper to be found in it. And you can't date a copper artifact except by the context in which it was discovered. So once it's ripped out of the ground, it has no context and is fundamentally undateable. Right? But we know from sites that have been found with copper, this goes back older than 7,000 years. And most estimates are that it will start about 10,000 years ago, because that's when the copper came available. That's when the glaciers melted off of the Great Lakes copper deposits. Right? So we're kind of using geology to infer some things from the culture, the theft of cultural technology, of cultural resources that has occurred and prevented true, proper archaeological dating of most of the copper artifacts that are known to have come from the Midwest. So, scoundrels aside, why do we think it's 10,000 years? Because the copper resources in North America aren't really a copper ore, at least in most cases they're not a copper ore, they're native copper. Okay? They are copper nuggets. And these copper nuggets were worked by cold hammering them. This work hardens the material, so you can only cold hammer for a short period of time before the material gets hard and brittle and will start to break. But at that point, you can put it in a campfire. You can get it glowing in the coals, take it out, quench it in water, and it will be soft again. Then you can cold hammer it again. Then you anneal, you hammer, you anneal, you hammer, you anneal, you hammer. Okay. And that's the techniques, that's the basic technology that was used in these ancient times to work the copper nuggets. This copper was traded from the upper Midwest, where it occurs in the upper Michigan area, down all the way through Central and South America. This trade reached its maximum extent during the Mississippian Empire. After which point the surface finds are starting to diminish. The surface finds of the native copper are starting to diminish, and you start to see native copper which is less abundant in Central America and the Americas and the Southwest region, like kind of the Four Corner states. You have native copper from there start to be traded north. Okay, and then when the surface available material starts to kind of dry up there, you immediately see copper smelting developed in the Central and Southern American empires. So there's an unbroken chain of copper technology. This is different from the Eurasian history of copper, because there you don't have large deposits of native copper. It's all copper ore that requires smelting in order to use. Right? Whereas in North America, you see an earlier onset, more available surface material of nuggets that can be immediately used. And then as the easy resources start to be depleted, you see its replacement with smelting. And all of this happens before European contact. Okay? Even the smelting was, I think, at least about 1,000 years before European contact. Right? So, you have an unbroken chain of use of metal. And if you look at some of these artifacts, I used to have a couple replicas of these things that I had made for show and tell and teaching purposes. They're in a moving box somewhere, so you're getting some sketches here this morning. At some point I'll either find or remake them. But you see a lot of knife forms that look like this with this sort of screwy up-canted handle. And again, if you take this and orient that in your hand, the blade would be sticking straight up in a useless form. So I think that these forms are palm-up knives. This is my hypothesis anyway, that these forms are palm-up knives. And then when Europeans did arrive with steel and iron, which were not used in the core of North America, but steel does predate, or not steel, but iron use does predate European contact in the high Arctic. That's another story for another day. But when iron technology is brought by Europeans to the temperate regions of North America, everybody said, oh, this is cool. We can stick this in our campfire and we can remake these older forms with iron, which holds an edge much better and is a much more durable metal, right? So the crooked knife, the Mocotaugan, is really kind of an intermediate stage, pre-modern, post-contact. You have an adaptation of a much older cultural technology to a newly available material, and you get this. These were made in many, many different forms. Most of the ones that that we see in the historical record are reshaped kitchen knives or reshaped shaving razors that were then turned into a more appropriate woodworking tool. Okay? So it's one culture taking newly available materials that aren't in a form that they're interested in and using the same heat bend that that they had been doing previously with the copper on the new metal. You get a composite form, which is really interesting. A lot of the old ones are obvious that they're not. Most of them are not going to be heat treated properly. But even annealed steel will hold an edge better than copper. So it's still a step up in technology. And as soon as blacksmiths became widely available, and many of the early treaties between native peoples and European powers involved the provision of blacksmiths, you then have tools made to purpose and properly hardened and heat treated and such. So the Mocotaugan is really, I would argue, best understood as an adaptation of an ancient, thousands of years ancient form with the modern steel. Okay. Now, this was my prototype, learning to make this. I forged this blade from scratch, and there's some things I liked about it and some things I didn't. I never fully finished the handle. I just epoxied this in because it was a prototype. I just wanted to go and test it. But we're going to do a little bit. We're going to do a bit more on the one for this series. The tip, I swept it like this because I wanted to really focus on being able to do hollowed work, and this was totally unnecessary. Right. So I discovered in using it quite a lot that I pretty much used it. This is a better pointer. I use this region a lot. From about where this tip of the blade is up, I never touched it, right? So this was all just kind of wasted material. So I on my next version, I do still have a swept up tip, but it's not nearly as exaggerated. Also, when I made this one, I made it with a chisel edge bevel up and hated it. Right? So I ended up in the process of sharpening this over and over again. Instead of a bevel up chisel edge, I ended up just kind of migrating to a normal knife edge, right? But on the ones I'm making for this series, I'm using a bevel down chisel edge. So just that slight change. The basic angle and geometry I liked. The basic angle of the handle I liked. This handle was made from a crook, and this is the traditional way to do it. This is a hop horn beam little crook. So this is following the grain. What I didn't like, though, is this was a little bit too exaggerated. I wish there was a little bit more material in there. And I carved the knob. A lot of these the historical examples were extremely ornately carved in the thumb rest. So in homage to that, I just kind of put a little knob on here when I carved this handle. And I don't like it. It just kind of gets in the way. It's just another big thing sticking out from my hand to get caught on stuff or bump into my work. And it's just kind of ungainly. So I'm just going to make that much of the handle for the ones I'm doing for this channel. So that's the prototype. Now, what are we going to be doing? Well, I'm filming this kind of in the middle of producing the series, so I've already done all of the smithing. There are several videos on the smithing, and I'm taking a hay rake tine and going all the way. from hay rake tine to a blank to a fully formed, hardened, and tempered blade, and you'll see all of those steps. This is the final blade. Okay. This little projection here on the handle acts like a rivet. If you can see in this, it's inlet. This has the same thing. It's inlet down in. And this prevents it from walking side to side and reinforces the bond with the handle. You can see that slightly less exaggerated sweep. And this is more in keeping with the indigenous style. This is a little bit, having this much of a sweep is something you see more in European hook knives and clog makers' knives and things like that. So this is a little bit more in keeping with the original style, and it turns out, guess what? The ancient version works best. Who'd have thunk it, right? So it is beveled down. This is the finished blank, and the handle is going to be cut out of elm. Okay, so this is a handle blank. This way I can experiment and tinker, and I'm not limited to the grain of the stick. I want to really find what is the best handle to fit my hand. So I decided on this one to work with elm. And because of elm's interlocking grain, that even though it's cut and there is a little bit of, the grain goes right this way. So there's a little bit of a weakness in the grain right at this juncture. But because it's elm, it will hold up just fine. Okay, it's the reason for the wood choice. So, in addition to all of that, we're going to go full traditional on this handle. This, like I said, this was a prototype. I just wanted it to get it working and start carving and learn from it, because I didn't have access to a true original piece. They're in museums where they belong. I wanted to make it and get it working and using and learning from it as quickly as possible. So I just epoxied this one in. But for this one, for the video, we're going to go full traditional, and we're going to use a pine resin based mastic to adhere it into the groove after the blade's inlet. Now this, dropping things, this is not nearly as strong as epoxy, so it's going to need an overwrap, and that overwrap is going to be a traditional sinew rope, soaked in hide glue, stretched wet, and that will seal down and make a very nice, smooth, tight, hard overwrap, right? So we're going to go all the way full tradish on this build. And there's also content on how to go all the way. This is cow leg sinew. Go all the way from the cow leg to the rope, and how to make the mastic itself. So we're going to do everything in this series. I hope you're excited about it. It's been really fun to produce. And go ahead, give this a like, and so that other people can see it. And I hope that you enjoy following along.